Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with NUE, that's NUE, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world.
Most people think improvement comes from more effort, work harder, push longer, stay up later. But neuroscience shows something surprising. The brain doesn't actually upgrade itself while you're working. It upgrades itself while you're sleeping and recovering.
Which means something fascinating. Some of our biggest breakthroughs, our clearest thinking, even your emotional resilience may actually be happening while you're unconscious. Today we're exploring what the brain is doing during recovery and why something as simple as a nap can dramatically improve learning, creativity, and decision-making. Our guest today is Dr. Sara Mednick. She's a cognitive neuroscientist and professor at the University of California, Irvine, and leads the Sleep and Cognition Lab. Her research focuses on how sleep and even short naps enhance memory, learning, and brain performance. So today we're going to explore what recovery is actually doing inside the brain. Welcome, Dr. Mednick.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I just want to get straight to a question I'm curious about, Dr. Mednick. If someone's listening right now and they were only to, if they were to have a rough night's sleep tonight, or let's say they only sleep 4 hours tonight, what parts of their brain is going to feel that tomorrow?
Do you mean what parts of their brain are going to sort of be at a deficit from that sleep?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the first part of the brain that actually gets affected by sleep deprivation is your frontal lobe. And what you see is this just a lot less recruitment of oxygenated blood to that area when you look at fMRI signals. And what that means, that brain area is sort of what makes us adults. It's the part that deals with the executive functions, our attention, our regulation of our emotions, and our ability to discriminate between what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. And so what you see is people kind of having inhibition problems when they're sleep deprived. They may make bad choices, health choices, when they're sleep deprived. Even in the middle of the night, if they're up late and they've been awake all day, what you see is the first brain area that really starts to feel that is that frontal lobe. And that's why you get people, binge eating in the middle of the night, or gambling all night, or, doing things that, probably if they were bright lighted morning and they'd been well rested, they would think, maybe I shouldn't, make a particular choice for myself right now.
Would you say maybe even sort of our discipline muscle is weaker when we're sleep deprived?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the discipline muscle, if you want to call it that. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Interesting. So that's a great way to start off. We'll get into more of the science of what's resting, but just at the beginning, want to just take a step back. What originally drew you into studying sleep and cognition?
I like this question about, can we make humans smarter? I've always found that to be, maybe that's people say you study the thing that you're most, wanting to find for yourself. And I think I always have, wanted to figure out how do you hack the system? How do you actually, make better decisions or get better test, grades, or just do better in life, better career moves, all those kind of things. And so is there some way that you can sort of figure out what is the mechanism of that smarterness? And so that's how I kind of stumbled onto sleep by going to a lecture when I was in graduate school of Bob Stickgold. And he was just starting this research looking at how sleep improves memory. And he was really the first person, along with another guy in Germany, they were sort of in parallel, who started setting up research experiments that could really tease out the effect of sleep for memory improvement and performance improvement. And I thought, wow, that's, first of all, just, a really cool way to think about getting smarter, right? Improving your brain capacity is via sleep. And then I also just liked him. We got along really well. And I thought I could probably do my whole dissertation with this guy. It's a long road. So you want to pick the right person.
Wow, that's such a cool thing that drew you into it. You just wanted to figure out how to be smarter, maximize brain capacity.
Yeah.
In that studying, when did you realize that, you probably, maybe it was just right up front, but when did you realize that sleep wasn't just rest, but that when we're sleeping, it's a really active brain process?
That's a really good question, because I think that when we started doing the research, I was his first graduate student. So when we started doing this research, the dominant idea was that, when you go to sleep, you just stop intaking information. And that's what allows this kind of passive system to hold on to whatever it learned when it was awake. And then, and that's obviously going to be better than more learning that's going to interfere with what you just learned. And then that's why sleep was actually helping with memory. And what we were showing is that it's not just this kind of passive holding on to stuff. It actually is an active process, that there's very specific reactivations of memories that occur while you're sleeping that can't occur when you're awake, because you're intaking information. And so you can't kind of go, into this kind of shutdown mode of, and just replaying information that you've had before, just like rehearsing or, just practicing, but you practice during your sleep. And that actually turns out to be an active process. And if you block certain pieces of sleep that are involved with that active process, you can block memory consolidation. So it seemed like a pretty clear evidence that it's not just holding on to information, it's actively consolidating it, and not just consolidating it so that you hold on to it, but also integrating what you've recently learned with what you know, right? Your whole semantic knowledge, everything that you know about the world, all your recent experiences have to get integrated into that encyclopedia of information that you already know. And that also occurs during sleep. So it's both consolidating and integrating, I think, is the real key.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask why the brain needs to sleep to perform these processes, but you answered it just there. Like when we're awake, we're in intake mode, and when we're asleep, it's a completely different mode for our brain to process those things.
And there's things that occur during sleep that you can't do when you're awake, because you need to be alert. You need to be focused on what's coming at you, and then you can't go into these really deeply restorative processes and synthesis of protein and develop, restoring of all these different essential nutrients and energy proteins that you need for the next time you're awake.
That's interesting. And I don't want to go on a tangent here necessarily, but one question and then a follow-up question that comes with it. What about something like NSDR? I know there's been a lot of talk about that lately, like non-sleep deep rest, and maybe it's just like social media talk and some hype around it, right? That's, from what I understand, that's almost more like meditative, like meditation to some extent. But what's the difference there? Because you're not like, you are awake, but you're not asleep. So like, are you getting some benefits of like sleep or recovery there? And then I guess the follow-up would be having you explain what actually happens in the brain during sleep, what's truly going on, like different stages and such. And
I do think it's a bit of a internet hype thing about the deep rest. I mean, of course, there's thousands of years of people meditating, and there's a real understanding of the benefits of any kind of what I call a downstate, right? That when you're not in this upstate, when you're not trying, dealing with the world and outputting energy, you can go into a restorative state, which is this downstate. And you do that when you're, deeply breathing. You can do that when you're walking in nature. You can do that, sitting on the beach. You can do that while you're meditating. You can do it when you're doing yoga and you're having, each breath be coincided with a movement. That's just deep breathing. That is awakening your autonomic nervous system, the rest and digest part of the autonomic nervous system, which is the restorative mechanisms of our brain and body. So to me, it sounds like packaging, like it's just a new way of saying something that is very old, which happens a lot.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I can definitely walk you through some pieces of what happens in our brain and our bodies when we go to sleep.
That'd be great.
Sure. So one of the biggest things that shifts, right? So I'm just going to go over, the autonomic nervous system, because that's actually really key to understanding the difference between wake and sleep. So you've got these two sides. One is called the sympathetic nervous system, which in my book, The Power of the Downstate, I call it the rev system, because it revs you up. It's the part that, increases cortisol, it increases your blood flow, it increases your temperature so that your factory's kind of running on high and able to react and move oxygenated blood to whatever body part you need and, react to the world, right? It's reacting to the environment. And that can be very corrosive. It can use up all of your energy and all of your resources. So the sympathetic, that rev system is revved up during the day. And then there's a big changing of the guards that happens the second you go to sleep. And then you switch into this restore system or the parasympathetic system. And the restore system is in charge of just calming everything down, right? It just turns down into power saving mode. And the heart rate has this massive reduction, and your body temperature also, you go from this very heated up state to this very cool state, kind of like a mini hibernation or torpor state. Your brain activity also slows down. So you start to go from having this very active brain state where a lot of neurons are firing at different times and asynchronously, to suddenly having the majority of neurons all firing together and then silent, and then together and silent. And you have these things called slow waves. And these slow waves start in the front of the brain, and they kind of orchestrate all of the neural activity from the front of the brain all the way to the back of the brain in these large waves. And so what's interesting is that really is great, because that orchestration of this sudden firing of all your neurons together and then a sudden quieting of them together across a whole second, just 1 second after another when you're in this deep sleep, that actually really helps with neural communication. So all of that memory reactivation we were talking about, all of this kind of this, the new discoveries of understanding how the brain cleans itself out and kind of rinses itself, all of that happens during these up states followed by these down states. So every part of your brain is going into a quieted state. And that's sort of the first, I would say, 60 minutes where you're going from, active brain activity, active heart rate, active temperature, faster blood flow, to quieter, slower, quieter, to this once you get to this kind of steady state, which is called slow wave sleep, then you're really in this kind of more torpor state.
And you say that first state takes usually about 60 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So a whole sleep cycle will take about 90 minutes. And the first 60 minutes of it is what we call this non-REM, where you're moving from stage 1 to stage 2 to slow wave sleep into this very, very slow range of sleep. And then once you've satisfied your need for slow wave sleep, that usually is a lot. You have a big need for slow wave sleep at the end of the day because you've been active all day long. And you have what's called a high sleep pressure, which means that you have a high need for this restorative slow wave sleep. And so you got a lot of slow waves in the first part of the night. And once you've satisfied a little bit of need for a slow wave sleep, then you go into what we call rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep. And that's a totally different brain state and body, where the slow wave sleep was really for boosting that restorative system. You actually have much more higher revved up brain activity during REM sleep. And it's a very active brain state where your heart rate increases. You start to have all those crazy dreams that you think about. When you think about dreams, those are mostly occurring in REM. And you go after you're paralyzed too. You basically almost every muscle except your breathing muscles and your eye movements are paralyzed. And that's good, because that's also when you have all these crazy dreams. So you don't act out your dreams, and that can be helpful to not running out of the room or running through windows or anything like that. So that's basically, once you get through one cycle of sleep, you've gone through all the different stages of sleep, and you've gone from this very deep restorative state to this highly active state that's so much like waking that I'm just kind of talking about a 90-minute nap, but when you wake up from that REM sleep, you have you have no problem waking up because you're already kind of in this revved up state. So then your heart rate is already high and it's easy to wake up from that. If you were woken up from slow wave sleep, that's actually quite difficult to wake up from. And you can have a lot of what's called sleep inertia because you're in that torpor state, really. And so it's very hard to transition and get your blood moving and get your brain.
That's interesting. You kind of answered a question I've always had, which is why sometimes you wake up and you're just like ready to go. And sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just got hit by a truck and and so there's actually, in those different stages, your body's in a different physical state, your heart rate. That's interesting. I'm just realizing that. So in REM state, if you're woken up, your heart rate's already up, but in slow wave sleep, you have a low heart rate. And so your body is actually in a totally sedated state.
That's correct. And so that's why, when people talk about what kind of nap should I take, people, my recommendation is always, you need to either nap up to like 20 minutes, half an hour, because that's before you get into slow wave sleep, or past slow wave sleep to 60 minutes, and then you'll be in this REM state. And those two states are really easy to wake up from. It's that middle 30-minute to 60-minute state that actually is quite disruptive and can take a while to really get yourself in gear.
Oh, that's super helpful. We're gonna get into naps later. I know that's a big area of research for you and one of your specialties. We're gonna talk specifically about naps, but just kind of going back to the stages of sleep. After REM, then what happens?
Then you go back to starting a new cycle. So basically across the night, so think about the whole night as being maybe 4 or 5 cycles of sleep. And what we call architecture or the composition of each cycle varies depending on where you are in the night. So as I said, right when you go to sleep, you have this very high need for slow wave sleep because that's the most restorative and it restores a lot of the resources that you use during the day. So the first couple of sleep cycles have much more slow wave sleep than they have REM sleep. But once your body has satisfied your need for the slow wave sleep, then REM, you've got less and less slow wave sleep and more REM. So in the morning, the two sleep cycles, 90-minute and the 90-minute sleep cycles that are in the morning, they have a lot more REM sleep. And that's usually why people feel like they've been dreaming all night, but it's really just that they had that intense dreaming time in the morning. And that is also when you get this really big burst of cortisol right when you're waking up, so that it helps you, because think about, why there's so many people that get heart attacks right in the morning is because their heart rate has not actually been ready to stand up, right? They're not ready to stand up. They're not ready to deal with the day. And then they can't really get themselves in gear and they have these heart attacks. In a healthy body, you have this really big sort of revved up arousal state that comes with waking up, so that you're already kind of ready to get out of bed and stand up and move around.
So going back to your original question that drew you into sleep research, which is how do we get smarter? Which of those stages is most important for memory and brain capacity?
There's many different types of memory, and there's many different types of performance, improving brain capacity and improving, creativity and focus, or whatever it is that you're seeking. Sleep can help with all of those different performance outcomes, and the different sleep stages help in their own way. So I wouldn't say that there's one that you should just emphasize because they actually work together. But I could say that there does seem to be some evidence that things like motor memory might be more helpful if you have more stage 2 sleep, so that kind of initial first half hour of sleep. Whereas things like really rote memorization can be really helpful if you have more slow wave sleep. And then things like your perceptual systems, your sensory systems, creativity, emotions, those can be more help with REM sleep. But the idea that you would just kind of, be able to just grab one and walk away.
Right.
Is,
Yeah. And I realize we can't control when we enter or exit stages. And so you can't engineer that. Where I really
actually, but
Well, okay, where I was really going with that question was, whereas if REM is more frequent in later in the night because your other needs are met, if you're sleeping 6.5 to 7 hours versus 8, that last hour and a half difference between a shorter night and a longer night is going to be more REM heavy. And so I was more trying to get at, like, what are those benefits? Like, what's the difference between the person who averages 7 hours of sleep and 8 hours of sleep in terms of brain development?
So there's a lot of variability there because it depends on when you get to sleep. Because the circadian, we have these two different systems that control sleep. One is called the homeostatic rhythm or homeostatic drive. And that's the one that says, well, I've been awake for 15 hours. So now I'm going to have, 2 hours of slow wave sleep or something, that's not accurate, but maybe an hour of slow wave sleep. I need an hour of slow wave sleep to make up for all these minutes I've been awake. And then the other system is the circadian system. And that circadian system controls your REM sleep. And that system is based on an internal clock. And so it has nothing to do with how much waking you've had or how much sleep you had. It's just going to turn on REM when it turns on REM. It's like an alarm clock. So the thing is, in order to get enough slow wave sleep, you actually have to get to bed pretty early, because no matter what, the REM sleep, which is driven by your circadian clock, is just going to start turning on, whether you've had enough slow wave sleep or not. So that whole initial period of slow wave sleep needs to occur before.
So it's almost the opposite of the way I was thinking about it. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's sort of, when I give like just give me the number one recommendation, it would be like get to sleep early. Because that allows you to make sure you have enough time for slow wave sleep before REM sleep starts up.
Interesting. Another question on sleep stages. I mean, this fascinates me, but and it's not necessarily around like which sleep stages matter more, but there are, from what I understand, there are things we can intake or do that affects sleep stages. Like, from what I understand, a lot of people that use sleep aids, whether that be cannabis or melatonin or even prescription sleep meds, they actually affect sleep quality and memory consolidation. Are you getting true restorative sleep or just sedation with those things?
There's so much hype around all these different sleep aids, and there's not a lot of good evidence that they really do what people think that they do. But the biggest one is cannabis. It's kind of interesting. So cannabis is a stimulant for your autonomic system, and it actually stimulates your sympathetic arousal and increases your heart rate. So there's this really strong belief that people can use cannabis to get to sleep, but there's very little research that supports that. And maybe it's because we haven't done enough, there's so many different strains now, and maybe there are versions of it that do not affect your arousal state. But, like alcohol definitely will increase your sleep onset. And so people use it a lot to get to sleep, but then it wakes you up really early in the morning because it deprives you of REM sleep. So then you have that to deal with. Of course, there's like Ambien and lots of sleep drugs that people use. And they each are a little bit different from each other. And so in some ways, you use one sleep drug and that might work for a while. And that might be increasing stage 2 sleep. And so it increases your sleep onset. And that is kind of all you need. Like you just need to get to sleep. So once you get to sleep, you're good. You can stay asleep. But then there's other people who they can get to sleep fine, but then they wake up in the middle of the night. And so maybe they need something else, right? Or they need something that's really short acting that when they wake up, they can just take that. And then there's melatonin. Melatonin does really seem to help people get to sleep, particularly, across time zones and things, because that's working on your circadian rhythm. But it's totally not it's not like a sleep drug, right? Because it doesn't actually bring on sleep. It just brings on the non-waking state, which provides kind of the ground for you to be able to fall asleep. So they all do different things, and some don't do really anything that we can find that is related to sleep, but there's a strong belief. I mean, there is more evidence that CBD does some sleep effects, and maybe if they're taken together with the THC, but it's difficult to really handle on the difference between.
Yeah, that makes sense. There seems like there's a lot of nuance there, like you said, and everything has the sleep onset's interesting. But you're right. I haven't seen a ton of evidence that shows the benefits, but I have seen some evidence similar to like what you're saying with alcohol, how it can disrupt like REM stages and such, all those different things. So, but maybe not enough evidence to show, hey, this is good for sleep. It's more so there is some evidence that shows this can harm sleep stages.
So much of it is just, well, what works for you? Like, is there something that works for you that isn't harming you? Stick with it. I have zero judgment around whatever it is that people do to get to sleep, as long as it's not creating problems for them. If it's melatonin, great. If it's Ambien, great. Whatever. I think that people really do need sleep, and they have sleep problems. And the idea that they won't, do something to take care of it is not healthy for them. I mean, sleep is important for every physical part of every system that you have in your body and brain. So I would rather have people figure out what works for them and stick with it without any shame or guilt than, avoid taking action.
Yeah, so I guess in the extreme, I can see where maybe a sleep aid is beneficial. That said, it seems to me like there's more behavioral things we should do or try first. Making sure we're getting light exposure during the day, exercise, maybe eliminating caffeine, doing the things that our lifestyle promotes good sleep, and giving ourselves opportunity for sleep, making sure we get to bed early. I mean, what's your thought on, how much to try behavioral things before we turn to sleep aids?
I mean, my whole book, about the power of the downstate is basically saying like sleep is a 24-hour job, right? Like you start in the second you wake up in the morning, and you need to think about yourself as a rhythmic animal. And if you really are in tune with the rhythms of your body, you will not, you will be ready for sleep at the end of the day. But it really depends on like, when are you eating? When are you exercising? What are you eating? What type of exercise are you doing when, right? Like, when are you most productive? Be in that cycle of productivity when you are. And then once you start to get into the beginning of the downstate, right? When your productivity is decreasing, really start to honor all the pieces of your day that you can start to cool down, right? And get into this cool down state. And that's going to improve your sleep dramatically. It's just that people don't often want to do those things, right?
Right.
And some people don't even have the luxury of having such a, planning their day so that all the different features of their upstate can be done in the beginning of the day, and then let things kind of cool down so that they can. But yes, of course, like, early morning light for sure, blue light, absolutely. Exercise, cardiovascular exercise in the morning, and then do more, muscle kind of stuff in the afternoon. Putting your eating, as early as you possibly can, and then shutting down your digestive system early in the evening as well, avoiding bright light, blue light of any kind after 6 p.m. Melatonin, can help with that as well. So there's so many things that you can do that will, do deep breathing exercises to increase your restorative system. All of those things. There's a million things in the day that can help. I think it's just really hard for people to be good all the time.
Right. I love what you said there. The sleep is a 24-hour thing. We had a sleep psychologist on, and she said something, in a similar vein. She essentially said, she listed all the things you just did, and she said you have to earn your sleep. Like you should treat your day like you're earning your sleep, like whether that means exercise or, setting your circadian rhythm the correct way, like you just said, Dr. Mednick. So I love that. Sleep is a 24-hour thing, not just during the night.
Yeah.
So one of the areas that we said we'd come back to, because I think it's one of the most fascinating parts of your research, is in the area of naps. And you already kind of touched on this, which was super interesting to me, that you either need to keep your nap short or long enough to complete a cycle. Why don't we just revisit that and explain when naps are helpful and how when naps can be harmful or disruptive to our rhythms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing about naps is that they can be really helpful if you're a napper, right? What our research is really the first years of my research, when I published my first book about napping, it was just like naps are, go. There's nothing wrong with them. Everybody should be napping. And we had so much research showing that, you could be engineering your nap. You could have more stage 2 sleep if you nap like this. You could have more slow wave sleep if you nap later in the day. You have more REM sleep if you nap early in the day. And then, that's going to help with all these different types of cognitive goals that you may have or sort of, performance issues or whatever it is that your creativity, any of the things that you're looking for, you can kind of engineer your nap to help with that. And then I got this big backlash of people who said, what? Napping sucks and I hate it. And when I wake up from a nap, I want to murder and it's just the worst. And I thought, wow, that's because I'm a napper. Like I'd never had a bad nap in my life. And and I thought, wow, what am I missing here? So we started looking into whether everybody benefits from a nap or people who really hate naps don't benefit from a nap. And we started thinking, okay, let's like do the same stuff that we've always been doing, but collect people, collect participants who say they hate to nap and people who love to nap. And what we found is the surprising thing is, well, maybe not so surprising, people who hate to nap don't benefit at all from a nap. And then we thought, well, let's try to give them some nap training. And we did a fully counterbalance design where we, had everybody, nap, and then we divided them into if they're habitual, non-habitual, and then we had them, a month of napping or a month of non-napping. So everybody had, perfectly designed so we could look at all the different effects of nap training versus not nap training on habitual napping. And we found that even after a month of, 4 weeks of regular habitual, regular nap training, basically just getting them to nap at least 3 times a week, there was no increasing benefits from the nap in the non-habitual nappers. So, and that was like, wow, that's a really interesting eye-opener, because you just think, well, sleep is great and more sleep is better. And it turns out that there are people who seem to, maybe we didn't do enough training. I don't know. You can never tell with science, right? Because it's just the limits of your results can only be limited by what you studied. So we studied 4 weeks and we didn't see any differences, which made me think, well, maybe these people, have a point, right? That not everybody should be napping. Not everybody has a kind of biological ability to really, switch from being in a revved up state to a restored state and then go back to a revved up state, and that is a kind of flexibility that everyone needs a downstate, right? Everyone needs to take a break. They need to go for a walk. They need to switch what they're doing. No one can sustain a full day of work. We just are not able to do that. And I have a lot of research to show that. But napping isn't always the answer, I think is an interesting thing to think about.
First of all, this makes me feel so much better. I know it's only a 4-week study because I'm in the camp that hates napping. For whatever reason, I can't. Like, I've tried all the things like you said, and like, I want to try it out. I want to see these benefits, and my body just cannot nap during the day. I don't know why. So that makes me feel a little better that there's other people like me out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's not like you don't need to do something to break up your day. Like maybe you need to go do exercise or meditate or go for a walk or, get a hug or whatever it is that's going to make you feel safe and restorative and have that kind of, restorative good energy happen. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, exercise is one of the most powerful because when you're revving yourself up with, this big cardiovascular burst, what comes after is this parasympathetic recovery, right? So you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it by revving up your system rather than during napping. You're really just bringing it all down.
Very interesting. What about in terms of just practical application of napping in terms of duration and time of day, in terms of not disrupting someone's regular sleep cycle? And for those that are in the napping camp, like how do you get the most benefit of it? Because I mentioned, I just know that long, late day naps can be very disruptive to your circadian rhythm.
So this is just me nerding out. It's not your circadian rhythm. It's like your homeostatic drive. Because remember how we said that if you, the moment you wake up, you got this counter of like how many minutes you've been awake. And then that amount of wake time determines your slow wave sleep amount. And the slow wave sleep amount is kind of driven by this homeostatic system, whereas the circadian rhythm is driving your REM sleep. So you can just kind of dissociate those two ideas and say, well, if you have this counter saying, I need more slow wave sleep, finally I'm going to get slow wave sleep. If you take a nap with a lot of slow wave sleep, like a late afternoon nap, that's going to have a lot of slow wave sleep. You are taking slow wave sleep away from your nighttime.
You're taking sleep drive. You're filling that need. And so then when you normal bedtime, you don't feel tired.
And it's specifically the slow wave sleep, right? It's not the REM sleep because the REM is going to come in the morning and that's driven by your circadian rhythm. So it's really that restorative homeostatic, that homeostat that will balance out your waking and your sleep. So that's why those late afternoon naps can be, it's great if you actually want to stay up later because then you're, reducing your sleep drive and you can stay up a little bit later, which, it's like a disco nap. So you can go out party and then just go to sleep when you want. That is why, taking a nap past like 3:00 can be a little bit dangerous, but it also depends on how long the nap is. If you take a 20-minute nap, like the power nap, that's not going to affect your homeostatic drive at all. It's not going to affect your slow wave sleep. So you can take a 20-minute nap at any time, and you can take a longer nap, I would say up until, you should be waking up at like 2 or 3. But it also depends on what time you woke up. Like if you woke up at noon and you take a nap at 2, right, then your homeostatic drive is very low. And so you could take a longer nap at that time. So it's really dependent on how long you've been awake.
That's just to clarify for listeners on those two terms, homeostatic drive is that how long you've been awake, right? Whereas circadian rhythm is like your body clock.
Exactly, your body clock. And that's what's really handling the REM sleep.
The 20-minute power nap. Why that's short. It's not disrupting your sleep drive. That's great. What benefit is there? What's happening in the brain in that 20 minutes?
That sleep has really helpful for alertness, kind of a reset button. You're just, because you are having a big dramatic shift from the rev to the restore state. So your heart rate drops, your body temperature cools down. You go into very nice parasympathetic arousal of that, that restorative arousal. So we see, benefits to memory even, but a lot of attention burst. That's if you're really crashing out and you take a 20-minute nap, what you feel is kind of suddenly like, oh, I'm back, and that's the extent usually to what a power nap will give you.
Interesting. We
Maybe not that deep, processing of information, but more just getting you out of that, I'm falling apart state.
All right, this show is all about mental fitness. And here's something most of us don't admit. Everyone has those moments when you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure, and what's actually going on in your head. That's why we built New. New is a mental fitness platform designed to help you clear your thoughts, reflect, notice patterns, develop habits, and get support that fits who you are. It remembers your goals, your wins, the things you're working on, and helps you stay on track. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just real support when you need it. If you want to be part of the early access group, head to talkwithnew.com. That's talkwithnue.com. Sign up now and get 3 months free.
I have one more question for you personally on naps, like how you prefer things. And then we want to get into something every episode we try to give something practical to listeners, like, hey, try this experiment for 7 days around naps or sleep or things. So maybe you can help us design that at the end of this episode quickly. But question on naps, do you prefer personally a full sleep cycle for yourself, like that 90 minutes, or a 20-minute power nap? I'm curious.
I'm definitely, I used to always have exactly 1 hour sleep. Like I would just go to sleep and I'd wake up. I didn't need an alarm. I would just sleep for 1 hour and I'd be awake. And that was, before children. So now I'm definitely in the 20-minute camp, and it's kind of interesting. Like, I'll still take an hour nap for sure without, if there's a possibility that I can. But like what I love is like, oh my God, I've just been having a full day of work and I want to do yoga before I have to go home and do all that stuff. So I'll get to wherever I am, like, 20 minutes early or, half an hour early, and I'll just take a 15-minute nap in the car, and it'll just reset my whole system. And I feel like I'm ready for the rest of my evening, and ready to kind of be present at yoga and then be present at for the family and, all that kind of stuff. So I definitely use it in transit a lot now, like pre-meetings or pre-talks or any of that kind of stuff.
Very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, like Luke said, we try to be very practical and hands-on in the types of things that we discuss. If we were going to design a 7-day cognitive recovery experiment, like for listeners to try for 1 week, things like consistent wake time, morning sunlight, optional afternoon nap, caffeine cutoff, those types of things. What would you do if we were just going to say, here's my 2-minute, try this for 7 days and see what works and doesn't work for you? How would you kind of structure that, like to reset someone's sleep? Maybe someone whose sleep is really poor.
Yeah, that's what the book is about, is setting up, and
you're talking, because you published multiple books, you're talking about the power of the Downstate.
The power of the Downstate, yeah. The first half of it is science, and then the second half is all practical. So it's exactly that idea of, well, what can you do? I sort of think nothing can change in a week, so you really need to allow for. I feel like if you try to do too many things all at once, it's really hard to maintain all those new things. And so it's nice to introduce things really gradually and slowly. So, my thought is, why don't you just do one thing for a week and see if that helps? And then you can also be more of an experimentalist and sort of say like, well, if you introduce everything, that you don't really know what is a thing that helps, right? So if you kind of do one thing and then say, okay, well, my first thing I would say is like, try to go to sleep by 10. That's to me it will change your life. It will, it's hard to always go to sleep by 10, right? Because whatever it is that we do all day long, when do you have caffeine that day? Or, when did you work out? Or, are you watching a movie? Or, all those different, it's hard to give that a try. But I would say, give that a week of give it 4 weeks, of just trying to go to sleep, by like 10:30, right? And then the other thing is, how to get to sleep is, of course, really important, because some people have a lot of trouble going to sleep. So I definitely try to, reduce any kind of light, bright light around, but also read a book. Like, don't read from screens, don't watch TV, don't look at your phone. Have some sort of big tome of a book right by your bed, and just have this, very warm light that you're using to read it. And then the second that you start to get a little sleepy, just put the book down and turn off light and try to go to sleep. So that's around nighttime. But then in the morning, get up and definitely go outside, expose yourself to bright light, take a walk around. Or if it's winter time, try to maybe get one of those all spectrum lights to sit in front of, to just really jumpstart the circadian rhythm. And also then, figure out what is your best rhythm for thinking, action, using your energy. Are you a morning person? Are you a midday person? Are you an evening person? When do you have your best peak time? And try to optimize all of your, what I call doozering. Like, the doozer kind of is like the person who's like always doing stuff, right? Try to get all your doozering in during that period. If it's, I'm my best at thinking during, from 8 to noon, well, then put everything else off your calendar, and that's when you're going to be thinking. Try to eat in the morning and maybe have some lunch, but then really slow down. Everything you put in your mouth for eating is going to arouse your sympathetic system, right? So if you eat, the longer you eat in the day, the more delay your melatonin is going to be, right? Your natural melatonin onset is going to delay your entire sleep rhythm. So try to stop eating earlier in the day, and then, try to think about your factory as starting to shut down once you are past your upstate rhythm, and, get your exercise in, get your thinking in, get all that kind of revved up stuff in earlier. And then once you start getting into the afternoon, evening, take a walk outside so that your eyes can see the sun going down and start to see that it's dark outside, and then create the world around you that is also mellower, right? And maybe with different lighting. There's all sorts of really interesting circadian light bulbs that you could use in your house that also reduce the amount of blue light at certain times, and then increase it at certain times. So there's a lot, there's a lot of that, just thinking about your activities across the entire 24 hours, that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And I guess in your book, you have a 4-week downstate plan that you walk through. It goes into more detail. So
yeah, and there's nothing magical about 4 weeks. It's, it could be 6 months. It's just, it's like, how do you introduce things? And then also, how do you become your own scientist to say, like, this is not changing me at all. I'm going to drop this one. I'm going to try something else and see, and just take it slowly and find your own personal rhythm, I think, is key.
I love, there was a lot of gold in what you shared there. And first, I like that you pushed back and say, just choose one thing. Don't try everything. Just choose one thing, whether that's 10 p.m. Read a book, read The Power of the Downstate. We'll list that in the show. We'll list that in the show notes for everyone to check out on Amazon and such. But thank you for, there's a lot of gold in what you just said.
Yes, you just want to listen
on Audible
to it
as well. Cool.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. So we'd like to, just to wrap up the episode, we'd like to just close with a few rapid fire questions. We'll just ask you a question and you just give a short, brief answer, the first thing that comes to mind. And we'll start. So other than the books you've written, other than The Power of the Downstate, what is one book you would recommend? Doesn't have to be related to sleep.
Oh, I just so love The Pleasure of Small Motions.
Great.
It's by Bob Francher, and it's about playing pool, but it's about so many other things too.
Are you a morning person, night owl, or now you maybe think, or a midday person or an afternoon person?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of just a regular day person. I don't really like early mornings, but I also like morning, so I'm kind of just an intermediate.
And one sleep myth you wish would disappear.
The harder you try, the better your sleep. That idea of like trying hard, to me, is sort of a misnomer with sleep.
One thing that helps you reset when life gets overwhelming.
Going and taking a walk with my dog.
Love that.
Nice. And what's something you've changed your mind about over the course of your career related to sleep? The big idea that's changed.
I think that we are one whole system. I think, and I think like science has a way of trying to divide things into the little compartments and sort of say, well, this is good for this and this is good for this. What I realize is you need all of it, like that whole idea of biohacking is kind of, to me, not the way it works. Like the way it works is actually the way nature over millions of years has trial and error figured out, the system that's working now. And so, that you could enhance one and not have a problem somewhere else, or you can just do one thing and that will be the silver bullet. Like none of that to me is relevant.
Yeah, that's great. This was super interesting, Sara. Thank you for your time today. The power of the Downstate. I'm adding it to my Audible library right now. And I think that there were some very interesting things from the conversation today that stood out to me. One was sort of the clarification, my misunderstanding of what circadian rhythm is. And I was assuming it was the whole day, but understanding how that drives our REM sleep. And then what was the second one? Our sleep drive. What did you call it?
A homeostatic drive.
Homeostatic drive.
I think about the homeostat is like a temperature in your room that if it gets below a certain temperature, then it's going to boost the heat, or if it gets above a certain, it's going to reduce the heat. Like it's the wake and sleep homeostat.
Yeah.
It's really just about slow wave sleep. So
the more we're awake and the more active we are and getting sunlight and those things when we're awake, then the more our body will desire to sleep. And I think the other big idea just about sleep is it's when memories are organized, emotions are processed, when learning gets locked in.
Yeah, but one of the things that I really liked from this episode, and it's in the title of your book, but upstate versus downstate as two different categories. That simplifies so much for me.
It's so nice to think about, right? Is it?
Yes.
There's like half of it is the upstate, but then the other half is recovering from the upstate and preparing you for the next upstate, right? So it's like our lives are all rhythmic, and so you can't just have this big expansive upstate without needing to have an equal and opposite downstate.
I love how simple that is. That's awesome.
And I think the one thing that I think there was a lot of really good advice there to attempt, but the one thing is just trying to get to bed earlier. I love what you said. It will change your life.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Thank you again, Dr.
Thank you
Sara
so much
Mednick, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for listening to the Mental Fitness Podcast.